Returning home now, Australia's job figures have grown for the 15th consecutive month. The Australian Bureau of Statistics says in the past year around 400,000 new jobs have been added.
However, the unemployment rate in December did increase to 5.5%. To discuss this and more, we're joined by Ged Kearney, President of the ACTU in Melbourne and CEO of the Master Builders Association, Denita Wawn, who's joining us from Canberra. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Let's start with those jobs figures. They were quite strong from the government's perspective during the week. First to you, Jed Kearney. I mean, Malcolm Turnbull says he's making good on his jobs and growth promise. It's pretty hard to argue with that, isn't it, looking at these strong figures?
Well, there is an increase in jobs, but as you said in your introduction, the real problem for this country is twofold. Number one, unemployment is still high and is growing, and number two, wages growth is completely stagnant. What we need and what everybody is saying, from the Treasurer, from the head of the Reserve Bank, right down to any economist, will tell you what we desperately need is an increase in wages, and there's lots of reasons why wages aren't increasing in this country, and the Prime Minister just giving lip service to that and saying, oh, don't worry, it will happen, won't make it happen. And as you know, the ACTU is campaigning very heavily around changes to our industrial relations system to make sure that people can, in fact, campaign and bargain properly to get increase in wages, which really is the issue.
Denita Wawn, can we come to you on that particular issue of wages growth? When do you think we'll start to see this pressure on the job market translating into higher wages for people to take home to their families?
Certainly in the building and construction industry, we're seeing wages growth already. It's been fairly consistent across the board. We're one of the industries experiencing growth, and certainly we've got job shortages, and so the wages growth reflects that. Undoubtedly, as employment increases, you would see adjustment in wages under normal circumstances. I'm sure that will come to fruition this year, but we've also got to factor in that the economy still needs to keep strong for that to occur.
So in terms of getting the mix overall correct, Jed Kearney, have we actually focused on all areas where we're seeing unemployment? I'm thinking in particular youth unemployment and even in fact underemployment. Are those parts of the economy being addressed?
Well, the biggest issue, I think, for a lot of workers in this country, well, a large proportion of them, is insecure work. We know that people are caught in a cycle of casual work, of short-term contracts, of not being able to actually plan for the future or bed down a loan, buy a house, get a car, that sort of thing, because they are stuck in these types of insecure jobs, particularly
Can I stop you there
our
very
young
quickly
people.
though, Jed Kearney? We did see of the 400,000 jobs created last year, 320-odd thousand were full-time jobs. So that starts to undermine, doesn't it, that casualisation of the workforce story that you're telling there?
Oh, you look at the figures, we still know that, well, at an absolute minimum, about 40% of the workforce are in insecure work. And when you think that the participation rate is rising, it means that a lot of people are having to add to the family budget. More people are having to go out and look for more work. So underemployment, casual work, not knowing how much you're going to earn from week to week is still a major problem for so many people in this country, and we think it is a major part of why wages growth is stagnating, because it's very, very difficult for people in insecure work and in short-term contracts to actually go out there and actually bargain for higher wages because they are so insecure. They don't want to lose their job, they don't want to put their head up. This is where the rules have to change, and I think this is a really serious issue for so many Australians, particularly, as you said, our young people. You know, our young people are finding it so hard to get jobs in their area where they've got degrees, to get jobs that are secure, to get jobs that actually allow them to lay the foundations for the future of their life.
Have either of you had a look at the figures to see whether some of those areas of entrenched high youth unemployment, you think of North Queensland, Northern New South Wales, for example, whether these strong jobs figures from last week are starting to make a dent in those problem areas?
Well, I think that certainly youth unemployment is an area we all need to concentrate on. We certainly believe that there are opportunities, particularly in building construction, where we are forecast for significant growth. Our focus at the moment is getting more people into apprenticeships, that's certainly where youth unemployed people could consider. And we've certainly looked at an initiative recently about pre-apprenticeships where we can actually encourage people to try the industry out before they commit to an apprenticeship. And we'd like to see a greater rollout of those initiatives so we can get that figure down on youth unemployment.
Well, because that's been a huge problem area for the federal government. We've seen scandal after scandal in the vocational education and training sector. We've seen TAFE have its own share of problems. That's the government directly funded part of that by the state governments. From what you're seeing on the ground there, Denita Wawn, are these sorts of reforms starting to make a difference? Is that sector being cleaned up? Are we seeing more vocation-ready people entering the workforce?
We're certainly seeing the clean-up, and there's certainly a huge number of vocational education training providers, both at a public and private providers, doing the right thing, and particularly in the traditional trades where we are seeing greater intake on those pre-apprenticeship programs, but we'd like to see more. We're forecasting a huge drop-off of people as the baby boomers retire, and we have more jobs coming through. So certainly we see there's an opportunity there for unemployed youths to get into the industry, but we need to ensure that there's a connection between them and those job opportunities, and that's where we need commitment from all levels of government and industry and the training providers to ensure that those opportunities are facilitated correctly.
And Ged Kearney in Melbourne, is that your experience? Is that how you are perceiving these reforms to the vocational education and training sector? Are you seeing that being cleaned up? Is there cause for optimism there?
I'm yet to have as much optimism as Denita. I mean, her comments about the industry wanting to hire more apprentices and use more apprentices, I think would be very welcome, and I certainly would support that. We do need to see the government recommit to the apprenticeship program. The Turnbull government, of course, has ripped around $2 billion out of apprenticeships and these sorts of vocational education and training programs. And that is where I think we need to see the federal government really step up. We need to see industries like Denita's and other industries really encourage the employment of our young people in those job entry level employment opportunities. In the past, you know, we've seen overuse, I think, of 457 visas and overseas workers to fill those job-ready positions. So we would like to see that turn around. We would like to see more apprenticeships. We would like to see a commitment from the federal government. And of course, we need to see a real commitment to building up our public providers, our TAFE sector, where we can be assured that all the levers that can be pulled to make sure that our young people are doing training that industry needs, like Denita, is actually happening. And we haven't got those dodgy RTOs just getting bums on seats, basically, and ripping the system off.
All right, time to change gear just a little bit. Both of you are powerful women at the head of organisations, and we've had this week Jacinta Ardern, of course, the Kiwi Prime Minister, announcing that she's pregnant, the second leader to fall pregnant in office. Do you think that she'd be getting this kind of attention if she was a male Prime Minister who'd about to become a dad?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, I think, you know, we have, this is the long history of this debate. I think Annabelle Crabb wrote recently that Christopher Pyne's had lots and lots of children since he's been a parliamentarian, and nobody's ever made comments. But can I just say to Jacinta, on behalf of the Australian Trade Union Movement, congratulations. I think it's wonderful news. And as a mum myself who had to work right up until the last minute when I was having twins and then go back to work when they were only 7 weeks old, there are lots of women in the workforce who've had to do this. I've had to do this. I hope she's really supported and well supported by everybody in New Zealand, and I think she'll do a great job of being a wonderful Prime Minister and a mum.
Denita, what's your... Sorry to go on. You were about to say?
No, I was absolutely agreeing with Jed. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of women out there working and being a mum at the same time, but I think this is a reflection of a changing attitude, not just with women working, but more importantly, hands-on fathers. There's hundreds of us out there working, and we couldn't do it unless there was shared parenting responsibilities, and that's a significant cultural shift. And for those who are concerned about Jacinda trying to deal with a newborn, I've come to the conclusion that actually babies and working are easier. They're easier to take with you to conferences and events. It's when they get to school age that things get even more complicated, and I'm sure there's all those mums out there at the moment are pulling their hair out and trying to deal with getting back to work and the kids still on school holidays. So,
Denita, is it more though than just a cultural shift that needs to happen there? Do we need structural change put in place to see this facilitated more?
Most definitely. You know, we did a survey recently of working women, and actually the whole community, it wasn't just women, it was men too. And 60% of respondents, we had thousands and thousands of people respond, 60% of respondents said that they were actually too frightened to ask to change their working hours with regards to having family responsibilities because they just thought their employer would say no, it wasn't even worth it. So yeah, you're right, we need huge structural changes when it comes to workplaces and working people being able to structure their lives around their families and not vice versa.
Denita, you of course represent some pretty major employers. What would be your response to those sorts of requests?
This look twofold. I think a huge number of employers are already doing these things day in, day out, not just for mums but for men as well. There are ways and means of greater flexibility in the workplace these days, and people are seeing the productivity benefits of enabling that flexibility. Equally, there are those that struggle to come to grips with change. It is incumbent upon all of us to provide those case studies to actually show why there are benefits for change. We don't support forcing employers to change their management, but nevertheless it is showing by example that you can do things just differently but still achieve the outcomes as a business you're trying to achieve.
Now, Denita, you are, of course, with the Master Builders Association, so I want to come to you first in regard to the issue around housing affordability. It's not one that's going away anytime soon, but we are hearing some ideas that are being put forward, not least of which is Labor pushing for changes to negative gearing, some saying that that would see greatest impact in terms of opening up the housing market with minimal to just a minor impact on the economy. What's your thoughts on what's the best way to approach this issue?
Well, from Master Builders' perspective, we say that it's simply resolving the supply bottlenecks. We've had huge population growth in Australia, particularly on the eastern seaboard, and housing development has simply not kept up with that population demand. We know that we're around about 100,000 homes short in Sydney and Melbourne alone, and so we need to focus on supply issues, and that relates to development charges, access to land, zoning and planning, and certainly we need to ensure that all levels of government, local, state and federal, are working collaboratively together to resolve those supply bottlenecks. We also need to consider the fact that housing affordability is different for different people and the circumstances are different in different states. Prices are difficult and high on the eastern seaboard, but equally we're seeing a dramatic decrease in prices of homes and a decline in the building of homes in Western Australia, simply because of the population declines there. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution on this issue. It's got to be looked at a local level with local solutions.
Denita, you talk about the supply side there, but why not look at the demand side? And do you agree with the analysis that says negative gearing amounts to basically a subsidy that artificially inflates demand for housing?
Well, we've seen different adjustments to negative gearing over the time, some good, some bad. We support the Henry Tax Review recommendation that said do not look at property taxes until you've resolved the supply side situation. That is where the critical changes need to come into effect, and we've got to recognise that just because negative gearing may well change some things on the eastern seaboard, it could easily have negative ramifications on the west because of different markets. There's no simple solutions other than focusing on supply and getting more homes for the people that need them in the right places.
Jed Kearney, I assume that you support Labor's view that negative gearing does need to be changed and wound back in some areas, but doesn't that risk damaging those house prices that people have come to rely on for their family sense of wealth?
Well, first of all, I think Labor's policy is grandfathered, so existing needs will not be affected. But I'd just like to go back to the issue of supply. The government is very heavily relying on that theory that increasing supply will bring prices down, but of course it hasn't at all. And all of the commentators, the economic commentators, say that increasing supply in the housing market doesn't work the same as increasing supply of other commodities where you can just go out and buy it. There's so many complications and factors involved in having to buy a house and who can buy the house that increasing supply will not, in fact it hasn't brought prices down where it's needed. So, you know, increasing supply is not the answer. The answer is those big levers that everybody, again, from the Reserve Bank governor down to every report we've ever had on the issue has said it has to be negative gearing that has to tackle this, and there have to be big changes to it.
Jed Kearney with the ACTU and Denita Wawn with Master Builders Association. A very thought-provoking conversation. Thank you very much for taking
Thank you for having
us through those topics for this week. Thank you.